Hi team, it's Vaughn here to read chapter 3 with you, or the rest of chapter 3. Just to set us up a little bit with where we were in chapter 3. Remember in class that we talked about how the same event is being told over and over again, the death of Santiago Nassar. And the reason why it's being told over and over again is because Gabriel Garcia Marquez, he wanted to make a statement where he wanted people to think about the function of memory and how accurate memory is. And so I asked you guys the question in class about whether or not you rethink about a situation after it's over. And that's like what he's mimicking here. So like every time that we rethink about a situation, we might add more details, or we realize that we forgot something in the way that we saw it before, or maybe we've talked to someone and that helps inform us about, it might help or hinder, inform us about something that happened that day. And so the book models the way the human brain tries to function. So the narrator is trying to figure out what the truth is of that day. And Gabriel Garcia Marquez, as he writes it, is trying to show us that the truth is not that simple. Um, that if you were to talk about the murder objectively or without bias, you would just say that Pedro and Pablo Vicario murdered Santiago Nassar. But the more human instinct is for us to be able to dig in to try to think about why it happened. And that why is really, really complicated. And that's why the book is so complicated too. Because people, depending on the situations that they're in, they're going to be acting very differently, not only because of the situation and differences in personality, but also differences in perspective and differences in their values as well. Okay, let's start at the very top of page 53. We see that Faustino Santos, he makes this joke to the Vicario brothers when they come in to sharpen their knives to kill Santiago, because he does not know that Santiago has taken Angela Vicario's virginity. Okay, top of page 53. Santiago Nassar knows why Pedro Vicario answered him. Faustino Santos told me that he'd still been doubtful and that he reported it to a policeman who came by a little later to buy a pound of liver for the mayor's breakfast. The policeman, according to the brief, was named Leandro Pornoy, and he died the following year, gored in the jugular vein by a bull during the national holidays. So I was never able to talk to him, but Clotilde Armenta confirmed for me that he was the first person in her store when the Vicario twins were sitting and waiting there. Okay, if we're thinking about question number 2 on your guys' handout, who takes preventative action and what are some excuses? Faustino Santos knows that the murder is going to happen and he doesn't necessarily stop it, but one of the things that he does do is that he tells a police officer that he overheard the Vicario brothers talking about how they were going to murder Santiago Nassar. Clotilde Armenta had just replaced her husband behind the counter. It was their usual system. The shop sold milk at dawn and provisions during the day and became a bar after 6 o'clock in the evening. Clotilde Armenta would open at 3:30 in the morning. Her husband, the good Don Rogelio de la Flor, would take charge of the bar until closing time. But that night, there had been so many stray customers from the wedding that he went to bed after 3 o'clock without closing, and Clotilde Armenta was already up earlier than usual because she wanted to finish before the bishop arrived. The Vicario brothers came in at 4:10. At that time, only things to eat were sold, but Clotilde Armenta sold them a bottle of cane liquor, not only because of the high regard she had for them, but also because she was very grateful for the piece of wedding cake that they had sent her. So she gives them alcohol initially because they brought her a piece of wedding cake, even though she shouldn't be serving alcohol this early in the morning. They drank down the whole bottle in 2 long swigs, but they remained stolid. They were stunned, Clotilde Armenta told me, and they couldn't have got their blood pressure up even with lamp oil. Then they took off their cloth jackets, hung them carefully on their shirt backs, and asked her for another bottle. So the way that she describes them is super duper composed on that day that they are about to murder someone. And remember, they had been drinking for 3 days straight, and then she just gave them a bottle of alcohol, and then she's going to give them another bottle of alcohol. They drank the second bottle more slowly, sitting down, looking insistently toward Placido Linero's house on the sidewalk across the way, where the windows were dark. The largest one on the balcony belonged to Santiago Nassar's bedroom. Pedro Vicario asked Clotilde Armenta if she had seen any light in that window, and she answered him no, but it seemed like a strange thing to be interested in. Did something happen to him? She asked. No, Pedro Vicario replied, just that we're looking for him to kill him. It was such a spontaneous answer that she couldn't believe she'd heard right. But she noticed that the twins were carrying two butcher knives wrapped in kitchen rags. And might a person know why you want to kill him so early in the morning? She asked. He knows why, Pedro Vicario answered. Okay, pretty vicious. So if we can add to number one too, if we can add to number one also, that Clotilda Armenta knows that the murder is going to happen and she doesn't necessarily try to stop them yet. We're going to hear more details here in a second, but she does ask them explicitly why they want to kill Santiago. It's kind of menacing too, the response that they give. He knows why, and that's the second time that they've said that. Clotilda Armenta examined them seriously. She knew them so well that she could tell them apart, especially ever since Pedro Vicario had come back from the army. They looked like two children, she told me, and that thought frightened her because she'd always felt that only children are capable of everything. So she finished getting the jug of milk ready and went to wake her husband to tell him what was going on in the shop. Don Rogelio de la Flor listened to her half awake. Don't be silly, he said to her. Those two aren't about to kill anybody, much less someone rich. When Clotilda Armenta returned to the store, the twins were chatting with Officer Leandro Pornoy, who was coming for the mayor's milk. She didn't hear what they were talking about, but she supposed that they had told him something about their plans from the way he looked at the knives when he left. Colonel Lazaro Aponte had just got up a little before 4. He finished shaving when Officer Leandro Pornoy revealed the Vicario brothers' intentions to him. He'd settled so many fights between friends the night before that he was in no hurry for another one. Okay, so remember the wedding happened, people are partying all night, and so when the colonel wakes up, he's like, oh, I've had to deal with drunk people who want to fight people all night long. I don't want to have to break up another fight. So he thinks it's just like drunk people after a wedding. He doesn't realize how serious it is. He got dressed calmly, tied his bow tie several times until he had it perfect, and around his neck he hung the scapular of the Congregation of Mary to receive the bishop. While he breakfasted on fried liver smothered with onion rings, his wife told him with great excitement that Bayardo San Ramon had brought Angelo Vicario back home, but he didn't take it dramatically. Good Lord, he mocked, what will the bishop think? Okay, we had talked a little bit about how it's a cultural thing for them to take Angela's virginity seriously, but this interaction that happens between the colonel and his wife, the wife is like, oh, I have some gossip for you, and she shares it with him, and he makes a joke about it. So like he doesn't feel like it's as big of a deal, and I don't think that the wife thinks it's as big of a deal that this is happening. So maybe it is an intense interpretation on behalf of the Vicario brothers to do what they did, and it's not something that can be explained as like a cultural norm. Good Lord, he mocked, what will the bishop think? Nevertheless, before finishing breakfast, he remembered what the orderly had just told him, put the two bits of news together, and discovered immediately that they fit like pieces of a puzzle. When he went to the square, going along the street to the new dock where the houses were beginning to liven up for the bishop's arrival. I can't remember with certainty that it was almost 5 o'clock and it was beginning to rain, Colonel Lazaro Aponte told me. Along the way, 3 people stopped him to inform him in secret that the Vicario brothers were waiting for Santiago Nassar to kill him, but only one person could tell him where. He found them in Clotilda Armenta's store. When I saw them, I thought they were nothing but a big pair of bluffers, he told me with his personal logic, because they weren't as drunk as I thought, nor did he interrogate them concerning their intentions, but took away their knives and sent them off to sleep. He treated them with the same self-assurance with which he had just passed off his wife's alarm. Okay, so number 1, more people as they're leaving the town square, they see the colonel and they tell him that the Vicario brothers want to kill Santiago Nassar. So you need to add that to number 1. And then when we're thinking about preventative action, one of the things that the colonel does do is that he takes the knives away from the Vicario brothers. Just imagine, he told them, what will the bishop say if he finds you in that state? They left. Clotilda Armenta suffered another disappointment with the manor's casual attitude because she thought he should have detained the twins until the truth came out. Colonel Aponte showed her the knives as a final argument. Okay, Clotilda Armenta is like, you should not have taken the knives from these men. You should have arrested them because it's not about them finding a weapon. They're going to figure out a way to kill him. You have to actually take captive the people who want to do the murdering. So let's add that to number 5 on your handout with what does Clotilda Armenta seem to understand that Colonel Aponte misses. And then there's one more detail that you're going to add at the end. Now they haven't got anything to kill anybody with, he said. That's not why, said Clotilda Armenta. It's to spare these poor boys from the horrible duty that's fallen on them, because she'd sensed it. She was certain that the Vicario brothers were not as eager to carry out the sentence as to find someone who would do them the favor of stopping them. But Colonel Aponte was at peace with his soul. Okay, so Clotilda Armenta knows that or she doesn't know, she thinks that the Vicario brothers actually don't want to commit the murder, that they want someone to stop them, but they feel obligated to their family, that they have to defend their family's honor. No one is arrested just on suspicion, he said. Now it's a matter of warning Santiago Nassar, and Happy New Year. Clotilda Armenta would always remember that Colonel Aponte's chubby appearance evoked a certain pity in her. But on the other hand, I remembered him as a happy man, although a little off due to the solitary spiritualist practices he had learned through the mails. His behavior that Monday was the final proof of his silliness. The truth is that he didn't think of Santiago Nassar again until he saw him on the docks, and then he congratulated him for having made the right decision. Okay, so Colonel Aponte also thinks about himself and what he just did. He sees Santiago Nassar when the bishop is rolling through on his boat, and he's like, oh, I did the right thing because he's not murdered, not knowing that the Vicario brothers are going to murder him later. The Vicario brothers had told their plans to more than a dozen people who had gone to buy milk, and these had spread the news everywhere before 6 o'clock. It seemed impossible to Clotilda Armenta that they didn't know in the house across the way. She didn't think that Santiago Nassar was there since she hadn't seen the bedroom light go on, and she asked all the people she could to warn him when they saw him. She even sent word to Father Amador through the novice on duty who came to buy milk for the nuns. After 4 o'clock, when she saw the lights in the kitchen of Placido Linares' house, she sent the last urgent message to Victoria Guzman by the beggar woman, who came every day to ask for a little milk in the name of charity. When the bishop's boat bellowed, almost everybody was up to receive him, and there were very few of us who didn't know that the Vicario brothers were waiting for Santiago Nassar to kill him. And in addition, the reasons were understood down to the smallest detail. Clotilda Armenta hadn't finished dispensing her milk when the Vicario brothers returned with 2 other knives wrapped in newspapers. So Clotilda Armenta was right. The twins go and get new knives when their first set of knives were taken away. One was for quartering with a strong rusty blade, 12 inches long and 3 inches wide, which had been put together by Pedro Vicario with the metal from a marquetry saw at a time when German knives were no longer available because of the war. The other was shorter but broad and curved. The investigator had made sketches of them in the brief, perhaps because he had trouble describing them, and all he ventured to say was that this one looked like a miniature scimitar. It was with these knives that the crime was committed, and both were rudimentary and had seen a lot of use. Ugh, so they committed the crime with dull knives when they kill him. Faustino Santos couldn't understand what had happened. They came to sharpen their knives a second time, he told me, and once more they shouted for people to hear that they were going to cut Santiago Nassar's guts out. So I believed they were kidding around, especially since I didn't pay any attention to the knives and thought that they were the same ones. This time, however, Clotilda Armenta noticed from the moment she saw them enter that they didn't have the same determination as before. Okay, so this is where we get into some details about the actual event. One brother is going to feel strongly about killing Santiago, the other is not, and then they're going to flip-flop. Actually, they had their first disagreement. Not only were they much more different inside than they looked on the outside, but in different emergencies, they showed up opposite characters. We, the narrator is talking, their friends had spotted it ever since grammar school. Pablo Vicario was 6 months older than his brother, and he was more imaginative and resolute until adolescence. Pedro Vicario always seemed more sentimental to me, and by the same token, more authoritarian. They presented themselves together for military service at the age of 20, and Pablo Vicario was excused in order to stay home and take care of the family. Pedro Vicario served for 11 months on police patrol. Okay, let's take a moment to add these details to number 3 for the Vicario brothers being characterized. And remember that we have to take this with a grain of salt because it's coming from the narrator's perspective, and we know that the narrator is friends with the Vicario brothers. Okay, top of page 60. The army routine, aggravated by the fear of death, had matured his tendency to command the habit of deciding for his brother. So Pedro, when he goes off to the military, when he comes back, he feels that orderliness of the military and also like the directness and the control, and he tries to do that to his brother. He also came back with the case of Sergeant's Blenneria. Okay, Blenneria is an STD of the time. So when Pedro Vicario is off in the military, you have to make an inference about what he's doing a lot of. As well as the arsenic injections and permanganate purges of Dr. Dionisio Guaron. Only in jail did they manage to cure it. We, his friends, agreed that Pablo Vicario had suddenly developed the strange dependence of a younger brother when Pedro Vicario returned with the barrack room soul and with the novel trick of lifting his shirt for anyone who wanted to see a bullet wound with Seton on his left side. He even began to develop a kind of fervor over the great man's blenderia that his brother wore like a war medal. Okay. Pedro Vicario, when he goes out to the military, he develops these like stereotypical, like quote unquote manly, or it's going to later be called machismo habits, where Pedro has a bullet wound, he has an STD from doing a lot of something, and then he also becomes like very demanding, even of his brother. Pedro Vicario, according to his own declaration, was the one who made the decision to kill Santiago Nassar. And it was at first his brother only followed along, but he was also the one who considered his duty fulfilled when the mayor disarmed them. And then it was Pablo Vicario who assumed command. Neither of the two mentioned that disagreement in their separate statements to the investigator, but Pablo Vicario confirmed several times to me that it hadn't been easy for him to convince his brother of their final resolve. Maybe it was really nothing but a wave of panic, but the fact that Pablo Vicario went into the pigsty alone to get the other two knives while his brother agonized drop by drop, trying to urinate under the tamarind trees. Okay, so remember that Pedro Vicario has an STD, so going to the bathroom is not that comfortable for him. My brother knew what it was like, Pedro Vicario told me, and never knew what it was like. Pedro Vicario told me in our only interview. It was like pissing ground glass. Pablo Vicario found him hugging the tree when he came back with the knives. He was in a cold sweat from the pain, he said to me, and he tried to tell me to go by myself because he was in no condition to kill anybody. He sat down on one of the carpenter's benches they'd set up under the trees for the wedding lunch, and he dropped his pants down to his knees. He spent half an hour changing the gauze he had his wrapped in, Pablo Vicario told me. Actually, he hadn't delayed more than 10 minutes, but this was something so difficult and so puzzling for Pablo Vicario that he interpreted it as some new trick on his brother's part to waste time until dawn. So he put the knife in his hand and dragged him off almost by force in search of their sister's lost honor. Okay, Pablo thinks that Pedro is trying to get out of the obligation to murder Santiago because of his STD as an excuse. Because Pedro's like, I got issues, man. You go ahead and do it by yourself. And Pablo's like, no way, we're doing this together. There's no way out of this, he told him. It's as if it already happened. They left by way of the pigpen gate with the knives unwrapped, trailed by the uproar of dogs in the yards. It was beginning to get light. It wasn't raining, Pablo Vicario remembered. Just the opposite, Pedro recalled. There was a sea wind, and you could still count the stars with your finger. The news had been so well spread by then that Hortensia Baute opened her door precisely when they were passing her house, and she was the first to weep for Santiago Nassar. I thought they'd already killed him, she told me, because I saw the knives in the light from the street lamp, and it looked to me like they were dripping blood. One of the few houses open on the misbegotten street was that of Prudencia Cotes, Pablo Vicario's fiance. Whenever the twins passed by there at that time, and especially on Fridays when they were going to the market, they would drop in to have their first cup of coffee. They pushed open the door to the courtyard, surrounded by the dogs who recognized them in the half light of dawn, and they greeted Prudencia Cote's mother in the kitchen. Coffee wasn't ready yet. We'll leave it for later, Pablo Vicario said. We're in a hurry now. Okay. Let's look at number 6 on your guys' handout because we're in Prudencia Cote's house and she's going to know about the murder of Santiago Nassar. What are her views on this and what are your views on her thoughts? Okay, remember, she is Pablo's fiance. We'll leave it for later, Pablo Vicario said. We're in a hurry now. I can imagine my son, she said. Honor doesn't wait. But in any case, they waited, and this time it was Pedro Vicario who thought his brother was wasting time on purpose. While they were drinking their coffee, Prudencia Cotes came into the kitchen in all her adolescent bloom. These men and their young women in their adolescent bloom is just like kind of weird. Carrying a roll of old newspapers to revive the fire in the stove. I knew what they were up to, she told me, and I didn't only agree. I never would have married him if he hadn't done what a man should do. Before leaving the kitchen, Pablo Vicario took 2 sections of newspaper from her and gave them to his brother to wrap the knives in. Prudencia Cote stood waiting in the kitchen until she saw them leave by the courtyard door, and she went on waiting for 3 years without a moment of discouragement until Pablo Vicario got out of jail and became her husband for life. Take good care of yourself, she told them. So Clotilda Armenta had good reason when it seemed to her that the twins weren't as resolute as before, and she served them a bottle of rot gut rum with the hope of getting them dead drunk. That day, she told me, I realized just how alone we women are in the world. Pedro Vicario asked to borrow her husband's shaving implements, and she brought him the brush, the soap, the hanging mirror, and the safety razor with a new blade, but he shaved with his butcher knife. Clotilda Armenta thought that it was the height of machismo. He thought, or he looked like a killer in the movies, she told me. But as he explained to me later, it was true. In the army, he'd learned to shave with the straight razor and couldn't do it any other way ever since. His brother, for his part, shaved in a more humble way, with Don Rogelio de la Flor's borrowed safety razor. Finally, they drank the bottle in silence, very slowly, gazing with the boobish look of early risers at the dark window in the house across the way, while fake customers buying milk they didn't need and asking for food items that didn't exist went in and out with the purpose of seeing whether it was true that they were waiting for Santiago Nassar to kill him. Okay, so we know that people are going in and out of the milk shop because they've heard that there's these twins that are talking about how they're going to kill Santiago Nassar, and so people want to see if it's true, but no one stops them. And so my question to you is, do those people who are looking to hear this drama that's happening, do they have an obligation to stop the Vicario brothers? Okay, let's keep reading. We're going to finally learn who Maria Alejandrina Cervantes is. So if you can turn to the backside of your handout for number 7, we're going to be filling that in. All right, the Vicario brothers would not see that window light up. Santiago Nassar went into the house at 4:20, but he didn't have to turn on any light to reach his bedroom because the bulb in the stairway stayed lit through the night. He threw himself into his bed in the darkness and with his clothes on, since he only had an hour in which to sleep, and that was how Victoria Guzman found him when she came to wake him so he could receive the bishop. We'd been together at Maria Alejandrina Cervantes's until 3, when she herself sent the musicians away and turned out the lights in the dancing courtyard so that her pleasurable mulatto girls could go to bed by themselves and get some rest. Okay, think about what kind of girls these are, if they are pleasurable girls. They'd been working without cease for 3 days, taking care of the guest of honor in secret, and then turned loose. The door is wide open for those of us still unsated by the wedding bash. Maria Alejandrina Cervantes, about whom we used to say that she would go to sleep only once, and that would be to die, was the most elegant and most tender woman I have ever known, and the most serviceable in bed, but she was also the strictest. Okay, so what is the narrator revealing about himself through this? What kind of place is it that she runs where she has pleasurable women who work for her? And then think about the description that the narrator just said about her. She'd been born and reared here, and she lived in a house with open doors with several rooms for rent and an enormous courtyard for dancing lit by lantern gourds brought in the Chinese bazaars of Paramaribo. But it was she who did away with my generation's virginity. Okay, so take a moment, think about what that means, write it down. What does she teach the men of the town? She taught us much more than we should have learned, but she taught us above all that there's no place in life sadder than an empty bed. Santiago Nassar lost his senses the first time he saw her. I warned him. A falcon who chases a warlike crane can only hope for a life of pain. But he didn't listen to me. Dazzled by Maria Alejandrina Cervantes's illusory calls, she was his mad passion, his mistress of tears at the age of 15, until Ibrahim Nassar drove him out of the bed with a whip and shut him up for more than a year on the divine face. Okay, so here's where we get backstory. Maria Alejandrina Cervantes had a relationship with Santiago for years. Santiago was obsessed with her until the dad broke up that relationship and made Santiago live on the cattle ranch, the Divine Face, for a whole year. Ever since then, they were still linked by a serious affection, but without the disorder of love. and she had so much respect for him that she never again went to bed with anyone if he was present. During those last vacations, she would send us off early with the pretext that she was tired, but she left the door unbarred and with a lamp lighted in the hall so that I could come in secretly. Okay, the narrator says that he's Santiago Nassar's friend, yet the woman that Santiago Nassar was obsessed with, the narrator will still go into her bedroom. Is that really a friend? Santiago Nassar had an almost magical talent for disguises, and his favorite sport was to confuse the identities of the mulatto girls. He would rifle the wardrobe of some to disguise the others so that they all ended up feeling different from themselves and like the ones they weren't. On a certain occasion, one of them found herself repeated, and another with such exactness that he had an attack of tears. I felt like I'd stepped out of a mirror, she said. But that night, Maria Alejandrina Cervantes wouldn't let Santiago Nassar indulge himself for the last time in his tricks as a transformer, and she prevented it with such flimsy pretexts that the bad taste left by that memory changed his life. So we took the musicians with us for a round of serenades, and we continued the party on our own, while the Vicario brothers were waiting for Santiago Nassar to kill him. It was he who got the idea at almost 4 o'clock to go up to the widower Zhu's house and sing for the newlyweds. Not only did we sing under the windows, but we set off rockets and fireworks in the gardens, yet we didn't perceive any sign of life inside the farmhouse. It didn't occur to us that there was no one there, especially because the new car was by the door with the top still folded down, with the satin ribbons and the bouquets of wax orange blossoms they had hung on it during the festivities. My brother, Luis Enrique, who played the guitar like a professional at that time, improvised a song with matrimonial double meanings in honor of the newlyweds. Until then, it hadn't rained. On the contrary, the moon was high in the sky and the air was clear, and at the bottom of the precipice, you could see the trickle of light from the St. Elmo's fire in the cemetery. On the other side, you could make out the groves of blue banana trees in the moonlight, the sad swamps, the phosphorescent line of the Caribbean on the horizon. Santiago Nassar pointed to an intermittent light at sea and told us that it was the soul of a torment of a slave ship that had sunk with the cargo of blacks from Senegal across from the main harbor mouth of the Cartagena de Indias. It wasn't possible to think that his conscience was bothering him, although at that time he didn't know that the ethereal love or married life of Angela Vicario had come to an end 2 hours before. Bayardo San Ramon had taken her to her parents' house on foot so that the noise of the motor wouldn't betray his misfortune in advance. And he was back there alone and with the lights out in the widower Jou's happy farmhouse. When he went down the hill, my brother invited us to have some breakfast of fried fish at one of the lunch stands in the market, but Santiago Nassar was against it because he wanted to get an hour's sleep before the bishop's arrival. He went along the riverbank with Cristo Bedoya, passing the poor people's eating places that were beginning to light up the old harbor, and before turning the corner, he waved goodbye. It was the last time we saw him. Cristo Bedoya, whom he had agreed to meet later on the docks, took leave of him at the back door of his house. The dogs barked at him as usual when they heard him come in, but he calmed them down in the half-light with the tinkling of his keys. Victoria Guzman was keeping watch over the coffee pot on the stove when he paused by the kitchen on his way into the house. "White man," she called him, "coffee will be ready soon." Santiago Nassar told her that he'd have some later, and he asked her to tell Divina Flor to wake him up at 5:30 and bring him a clean change of clothes, just like the ones he had on. An instant after he'd gone to bed, Victoria Guzman got the message from Clotilda Armenta sent via the milk beggar. So it's very he said, she said. At 5:30, she followed his orders to wake him up, but she didn't send Divina Flor and went to the bedroom herself with the suit of pure linen because she missed her chance. She never missed a chance to keep her daughter away from the claws of a senor. Maria Alejandrina Cervantes had left the door of her house unbarred. I took leave of my brother, crossing the veranda where the mulatto girls' cats were sleeping curled up under the tulips and opened the bedroom door without knocking. The lights were out, but as soon as I went in, I caught the smell of a warm woman and I saw the eyes of an insomniatic leopard in the darkness. And then I didn't know anything else about myself until the bells began to ring. Okay. Think about this character, Maria Alejandrina Cervantes, who gets to have sex with all of the men in town, and she also has sex with the narrator, also has sex with Santiago Nassar. And yet the men appreciate her and they love her, they don't shame her. So I ask you this question, what is Marquez doing with her character? A more specific question with that, is how does she stand in stark contrast to Angela Vicario's character. On his way to our house, my brother went in to buy some cigarettes at Clotilda Arminta's store. He drank so much that his memories of that encounter were always quite confused, but he never forgot the fatal drink that Pedro Vicario offered him. It was liquid fire, he told me. Pablo Vicario, who had fallen asleep, awoke with a start when he heard him come in, and he showed him the knife. We're going to kill Santiago Nassar, he told them. My brother doesn't remember it, but even if I did remember, I wouldn't have believed it. He told me many times. Who the would ever think the twins would kill anyone, much less with a pig knife? Then they asked him where Santiago Nassar was because they'd seen the two of them together, and my brother didn't remember his own answer either. But Clotilda Armenta and the Vicario brothers were so startled when they heard it that it was left established in the brief in separate declarations. According to them, my brother said, Santiago Nassar is dead. Then he delivered an episcopal blessing, stumbled over the threshold, and staggered out. In the middle of the square, he crossed paths with Father Amador, who was going to the dock in his vestments, followed by an acolyte ringing the bell and several helpers carrying the altar for the bishop's field mass. The Vicario brothers crossed themselves when they saw them pass. Clotilda Armenta told me that they'd lost their last hopes when the priest passed by her place. I thought he'd gotten my message, she said. Nonetheless, Father Amador confessed to me many years later, retired from the world in the gloomy Cala Fell rest home, that he had in fact received Clotilda Armenta's message and others more peremptory while he was getting ready to go to the docks. The truth is, I didn't know what to do, he told me. My first thought was that it wasn't any business of mine, but something for the civil authorities. But then I made up my mind to say something in passing to Placido Lanero. Yet, when he crossed the square, he'd forgotten completely. You'd have to understand, he told me, that the bishop was coming on that unfortunate day. At the moment of the crime, he felt much despair and was so disgusted with himself that the only thing he could think of was to ring the fire alarm. My brother Luis Enrique entered the house through the kitchen door, which my mother left unlocked so my father wouldn't hear us come in. He went to the bathroom before going to bed, but he fell asleep sitting on the toilet. And when my brother Jaime got up to go to school, he found him stretched out, face down on the tile floor, and singing in his sleep. My sister, the nun, who wasn't going to wait for the bishop because she had an 80-proof hangover, couldn't get him to wake up. It was striking 5 o'clock when I went to the bathroom, she told me later. Later, when my sister Margot went in to bathe before going to the docks, she managed with great effort to drag him to the bedroom. From the other side of the sleep, he heard the first bellows of the bishop's boat without awakening. Then he fell into a deep sleep, worn out by his carousing, until my sister, the nun, rushed into the bedroom, trying to put her habit on as she ran, and woke him up with her mad cry. They've killed Santiago Nassar. Okay, this is also where we get a detail that Margot, the sister who we thought maybe would be in love with Santiago Nassar, she actually can't get married because she's a nun. Okay, you're gonna take some time to go back and reread if you need to. Finish your questions here. I do ask you the question about find one example of irony. Irony is where the characters often don't know something, but we do. So it becomes ironic. Characters don't know something, but we do. Or it could be something that can be contradictory, can sometimes be ironic as well. Okay, find your example of irony, answer the questions, and I will see you on Thursday, Friday. Be nice to the sub, be nice to each other, be nice to yourself, and I will see you Thursday, Friday. Bye-bye.